Hello and welcome to the Premier Football Podcast, Fantasy Premier League show. That's a bit of a mouthful. We're back again. I'm joined today by Sean Windsor. Sean, how are you getting on?
I'm doing well, Rafe. Delighted Fantasy's back. Delighted that Gameweek 1's locked in. No more changing the team around.
Man, I'm absolutely distraught that it's back. I was really looking forward to the return of the season until the season came back. And then all of a sudden you hear Mitrovic isn't playing. You've put so much time into preparing this and suddenly you've just remembered all of the pain that goes alongside with captaining a fantasy football team for the year. How did you get on first week anyway?
Not too bad. I got 72 points. Team changed a little bit from what we discussed last week. Nothing drastic. I did work my way to getting Timo Werner in as I was bigging them up last week.
What we're going to do is we're going to have a quick look at the what are they calling them now? The kings of the week. We call them the dream team, but I think they're calling them
the highest scoring players of the week.
The highest scoring players. We've got them on screen now. Obviously, Gaeta in goals, Saiss, Gabriel, James, Castagna, Digne, Salah, Hendrick, Willian, Jorginho, and Vardy. You were obviously packing Salah. We spoke about that last week on the show. Did you manage to squeeze anyone else in from the dream team?
No one else from the dream team, although some interesting names along with some kind of fantasy famous names. Jamie Vardy, Digne to a certain extent, and then new guys, Gabriel popping in, Reece James as he locked down a spot, and then great to see Jeff Hendrick there as well. He had a great game.
Would there be anybody here that you'd be tempted to bring in? I know I myself had a strong look at Willian before we started in game week 1, but I just wasn't convinced that he was going to play absolutely every week. Do you think he's going to be a regular fixture for Arsenal? Because I think if he's playing every single week, he could be one to have a look at, because he had his stats were very impressive for Chelsea last season.
Yeah, starting off with a hat-trick of assists is pretty impressive too. I think for the right reasons you left him out. I still wouldn't be convinced of his playing time. Like Pepe is there, Saka is there. It'd be one that I could hold off because he's already risen in price. So I've missed that boat. See how he gets on. Fixtures turn for Arsenal. So maybe it's one that I've missed that haul to start with. Can look elsewhere and maybe come back to him when the fixtures pick up.
Let's have a look and see what kind of games Arsenal have. Obviously, they host West Ham this week, which would be ideal for anyone that already had an Arsenal player in, Aubameyang. But we're not sure if he is going to play again. Obviously, he kept Pepe on the bench last week. But after this game week, they go to Liverpool, host Sheffield, and they go to City, they host Leicester, and then they travel to United. It's not an especially favourable run for Arsenal, so it's maybe not the right time to be investing in any of their players. Never mind their defenders in Gabriel there. Yeah. How impressed were you by Chelsea? Would you be tempted to splurge in a couple of blues?
No, and one of the ones I picked up last week, I mentioned Werner. I brought him in. He looked good. Chelsea as a team didn't impress me despite winning 3-1. Reece James, he had a great game. But there's the caveat that Azpilicueta was coming back from injury. So he's also one you kind of have to worry about his game time. So one to watch again.
Now, they've obviously gone for a Wolves keeper and a defender here. I said they've gone for them. They've scored the most points. I was holding off on packing at the team for Wolves until after they cleared their first 2 games. Obviously, they've got City at home the next game, but then they've got this 5-game run of consecutive 2s that I'll definitely be splurging on. Raul Jimenez looks nailed down to come into a lot of teams. We'll talk about him maybe in a little bit. But Roman Saiss obviously picking up 14 or 15 points last week, and I think Connor Cody did quite well as well. You had Cody in your team, didn't you?
Had Cody, swapped him for Stevens from last week. I think mentioning on air last time that Ramsdale was in for Sheffield United. If they did as well as last season, it's a great defence to buy into. Kind of thought about that more and thought I need to see can they do as well as last season before investing in them. So I actually swapped him to Cody. But Saiss looked great. He actually could have easily had another goal, if not another 2.
Yeah, he was a stalwart in my team last season. And I actually had him in at the start of the season and only swapped him for Joe Gomez last minute. So it'll definitely be one that needs to get reviewed. I don't think I'm going to bring him in this week, just obviously because they're playing against Manchester City. There's no point, but probably the week after, I'll be looking to pull in a couple of Wolves players, whether it's in a single transfer or a couple of transfers or possibly even dropping a wildcard. Were you tempted to drop the wildcard yourself?
No, I'm quiet.
How did you do that? Give us a look at your team there.
Yes, so got 72 points in total. There's a couple of changes from the team that I showed, but keeping the likes of McCarthy in net, Alexander-Arnold, Aubameyang remain my captain. I kept Calvert-Lewin. I said he was a little bit of a risk, but took his header really well against Spurs. Richarlison possibly looked better out of the two of them, but I'm still very happy with Calvert-Lewin. I got Werner in. Got the assist for the penalty, but it was at the sacrifice of Jimenez, who got a goal. So, but I'm happy to have Werner. I think he should be fine for the game against Liverpool. I have no worries, no plans of taking him out.
I see there that you've still got 2 Spurs players in the team from last week, Davies and Son. Are you planning to keep both of them going forwards, considering what we saw from Spurs last week?
I'm not overly confident in them, but they do play Southampton, who lost to Brentford last night in the League Cup while playing a very strong first team. So if someone's in a worse position than Spurs, it's probably Southampton. Now, I know Spurs are travelling with Europe this week, but I'm willing to look at Son and Davies and see how they do this weekend.
Well, why don't you give us a look at your team for next week and see what kind of changes you're thinking about?
Yeah, so that's the team for this weekend. It's keeping the 4-4-2, bring Taylor in off my bench. The only players I would consider taking out are Werner for maybe someone like Martial or Vardy. I have the money in the bank still that I mentioned last week. Keeping it, I thought was important in case I wanted to bring in a Man U or Man City this week. I think I'll hold off doing that because I don't want to take out Aubameyang or Salah, for whom my number one target would be, which would be De Bruyne or Fernandes. Pretty sure that team's going to stay as is. That also allows me to roll the 2 free transfers into game week 3 then.
Well, Sean, obviously you got 72 points. I've scored 65 this week, but I'm relatively happy with a lot of the choices that I made. Obviously, going from Mo Salah as captain was essential given the hat-trick that he got. I'm over the moon with that because he did save my week to a degree. I was severely unimpressed with Pereira in midfield. I know they were playing against a good Leicester side, but there are no easy games in the Premier League, and he did look very out of his depth. I suppose that is one of the risks that you take bringing in newly promoted players. Adama Traore was fairly anonymous, but I do still have faith in him going forwards. Danny Ings looked relatively decent against Spurs. I wouldn't say he was unlucky not to score, but given the class that he has and the quality that he has, I'd be surprised if he didn't get involved sometime soon. Richarlison was obviously unbelievable for Everton. I'm going to actually bring in another Everton player for next week, given what I saw from them. But I'm incredibly confident that he's going to score a lot of points this year, given the service that he's got in behind and given the attacking license that he seems to have been given. Mitrovic obviously scored midweek in the League Cup. He only featured for half an hour, 29 minutes in the opening week. I'm not sure what that was about. If he doesn't become a first team regular, he's obviously going to need to be shipped out. But we still know that everything Fulham do go through him. The people that I was unimpressed with in the team, Egan here. I know they play Villa and Leeds next, but I'm not massively convinced that we're going to see the same Sheffield United that we saw last season. I was massively unimpressed with Joe Gomez. I watch a lot of Liverpool. I watch a lot of Joe Gomez, and I'm not convinced about him as a defender at all. Alexander-Arnold is obviously an attacking player. Van Dijk obviously scores goals. Robertson obviously chips in with assists as well. But I don't think Gomez is going to score any of those points that the other Liverpool defenders do. But I think he's going to miss out on the clean sheets that they scored last year. Yeah, so the team that I plan to go with next week, as you can see here, there's an obvious change. Seamus Coleman has come in at the back. Now, in an ideal world, that would be Lucas Digne, but for the price, for the extra £1 million, I couldn't afford to bring him in. So that'll be maybe one I'll look to upgrade in a couple of weeks. In the back of my mind is the wildcard option. Have you been tempted, Sean, with the wildcard yet?
No, holding off. I'm content. I like to keep it.
How long are you holding off for?
I like to keep it to at least an international break or two has passed.
Yeah, that's fair. But I mean, game week 3, game week 4 is prime wildcard season. So he could well be upgraded to Lucas Digne soon. Because I do think that Everton are going to keep clean sheets, and I do think that Digne is going to be involved. But for now, it's Coleman that occupies that defensive position, and I'm going to give John Egan a couple of weeks to see how he gets on. Pereira has dropped to the bench because, like I said, I'm really not convinced about him, and we're going to give Traore another chance. I'm keeping the faith with Richarlison and Ings and Mitrovic, but if Ings doesn't score this week, it's highly likely that I'm going to be bringing in Jimenez up front for these 5 games here that they have coming up. I think that if I have a look at Southampton's fixtures here, they're not bad in terms of colours that you see.
You'd be
They're
worried
a
taking
little
them
bit more
ahead of that.
difficult than you think. I'm gonna trust Dallas in defence to pick up a clean sheet. And I suppose the big question this week with the Manchester teams being back in action is how quickly people are going to look to get them into the team.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you worried about? I know, Man, you're playing Crystal Palace. That's obviously a nicer game than Man City against Wolves in terms of owning either Manchester
Well, look,
players.
let's have a look at a couple of the Manchester team's fixtures. So, if we have a look here at Manchester United's fixtures, you'll see. Thanks, Chris Smalling. Oh, he's back as well, isn't he? You'll see that they actually play Crystal Palace, which is by no means a guaranteed win, considering how defensive Palace are going to be. You've got Brighton away. You know, they're going to be defensive. They host Spurs, who you know are going to be defensive. Newcastle are going to be defensive. Chelsea at home, that could be end to end, and Arsenal at home could be end to end as well. But you're waiting until game week 6 or 7 before they've got a couple of open games. I wouldn't be absolutely clamoring to get United players in. I know Fernandes is going to be involved every week in some way, shape, or form. Are you tempted to bring in Fernandes, Sean?
One thing on the side of caution for either Manchester team's assets at the moment is price changes. Price changes at this point of the season in fantasy football can be really difficult to navigate. If a player goes up by 0.1, it costs you 0.5 in the first few weeks to get them, because depending on the money you have because everyone's running off either an even or a 0.5. It's difficult to fit them in retrospectively. I think if you're going to get them, move while they are the price they are. It's the case with Willian. Because he's 8.1, I've kind of ruled him out of any consideration, and the fact that I am worried he's a rotation. But I think when you're playing fantasy football at the start, the price rises are really important for building team value. So if you've missed one, I wouldn't jump on it. But Fernandes, De Bruyne, they haven't risen yet. They're definitely quality players. You've already said Fernandes. United's style of play is fast attackers getting into the box. They will draw fouls. He will score penalties. It's definitely temptation. I'm not personally tempted for this week, but going forward, I definitely would be considering them more and more.
I suppose the other side of the coin is Kevin De Bruyne on the blue side of Manchester. You look at their fixtures here. I'm waiting actually until after this game week, when they go to Wolves to bring him in. I'm going to swap him with Aubameyang, I reckon, because Arsenal actually come into a relatively sticky period of fixtures. I'm looking at these and I'm thinking, Leicester could be difficult. Leeds, I know they're opening against Liverpool, Arsenal, West Ham. You know, Kevin De Bruyne is going to be involved though every single week, and you know he's going to be, like you said, with Fernandes, he's going to be involved in assists and in goals. It doesn't matter who they're playing; he's going to be racking up points, isn't he?
Yeah, Man City as a team, I don't worry about their fixtures when it comes to owning a player like De Bruyne. He scores at any time. He's fixture proof. He's one you don't have to worry. Man U themselves, they could go into a sticky patch any time. I know they looked good after the project restart, but Man City, not a team you have to worry about fixtures, I don't think.
Is Aubameyang fixture proof?
Aubameyang in fantasy football is a little bit of an enigma. I owned him a lot last season, and I transferred him out a lot last season, so he kept winding himself back in. He scores well sporadically. He scores against bad teams, he scores against good teams, but he'll also not do anything against bad teams and not do anything against good teams. He's tough to pin down when his big scores are coming.
I'm going to give him the armband this week, obviously at home to West Ham. I know you went for him last week. I assume that's something you plan to do again this week.
Yeah, no, that's definitely the plan this weekend. I think Arsenal against West Ham, it could be a game of goals. Arsenal looked better than I recall from Project Restart. So I think going forward, he's obviously their main guy. He's on penalties. They haven't had their share yet, the way Liverpool and Leicester did last weekend. So who knows? Hopeful that he'll do better than Salah this week.
We'll just have a quick look at the fixtures for this week. Are there any that jump out to you here and you think I need to get?
If I was picking anyone from this week, Everton. It's only 1 week that they played against Spurs, a Mourinho team. Now Spurs did look poor, but Everton looked great. You've already got Coleman in. I think that's a good signing.
Yeah.
And you want Digne. I think that's a better signing. But James, first game now, maybe he's just going all out, showing off. and he did look really good. So I'm happy to roll my transfer, as I mentioned, and then see how teams do again this week. I think if you give it the first 4 weeks, you kind of see who means business or who was just a flash in the pan.
Newcastle obviously host Brighton. Newcastle looked very good last week. Would you be interested in possibly Callum Wilson maybe?
I already have 2 Newcastle players, so I wouldn't go for a triple up.
I don't have any Newcastle players. Would it be more inclined to bring in a Newcastle defender like Lascelles, or maybe is there a cheap option for Newcastle that you know of?
Well, I think the man you just mentioned there a second ago, Wilson. I think if you're going to do the transfer for free, Wilson could be a great one. I think Everton players looked really good. I think Digne would be the guy there. And then I already mentioned Jamie Vardy. I think, yeah, it was 2 penalties, but he does it year after year. And they're playing Burnley, who've not had the best of transfer windows so far. It's going to be their first game. Leicester have a competitive game under their belt. I know Burnley are playing the League Cup. It's slightly different. But yeah, Jamie Vardy would be another one I'd be looking at. And then I will be keeping my eye. I wouldn't advocate bringing in Martial this week or a United attacker, but he'd be one I'd watch out for. I think Crystal Palace game is probably a good way of getting a feel for how United are going to start off.
Right. Well, that's been this week's edition of the Fantasy Football Show on the Premier Football Podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you're still here, please remember to subscribe. I'm going to put a link down the bottom for you guys to click there. Remember to watch our other videos. We're going to be putting out content 3 times a week. We're going to be putting out a main podcast. We're going to be putting out the Fantasy Football Show, and Joe's going to be putting out a feature piece on something exciting that's happening on the Premier League. Sean, thanks very much for joining me tonight.
No problem, Rafe, and we'll have the league code as well in the description below.